Good evening. Welcome to Economics 330, Global Trade and Political Economy. Today, of course, is Wednesday, February 18th, 2026. Of course, we're holding the class on an off day because Monday was holiday and Tuesday was a no class day. Um, in this week's Module 4 lecture, we will continue our discussion on the four major institutions for managing world trade. As such, your learning objectives is that by the conclusion of this week's assessment, you should be able to successfully address the following learning objectives. Number one, explain the origins, rationale, and roles of post-World War II institutions that were established to manage global trade. To which you probably should say that pre-World War II international organizations, such as the Bank for International Settlement, BIS, was established in Basel, Switzerland, and that it was really set up to oversee the settlement of German post-World War I reparations. Excuse me about that. I have to drink. The BIS main purpose was to promote cooperation among central banks. Crucially, BIS lacked institutional capacity and mandate to successfully address major economic and geopolitical challenges, such as the Great Depression, post-World War II reconstruction of Europe, and conflict resolution and rulemaking institutions. Consequently, in July 1944, delegates from 44 countries convened the Bretton Woods Conference at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. And within 22 days, they endorsed a framework for international economic cooperation after World War II. The rules-based international order, as we know it today, is predicated on a system of laws, rules, and norms, and it has underpinned the international interactions since its formal establishment in 1945. Two international economic organizations resulted from Bretton Woods institution. And these are, of course, the International Monetary Fund, which you will get to learn plenty about in the weeks ahead. But the International Monetary Fund is, of course, also called the IMF. And while the second institution is the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or IBRD, which is now part of the World Bank Group. In 1948, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, became the main global trade organization, that is. The United Nations, or the UN, which succeeded League of Nations, was established after World War II, and its charter, which was drafted by 50 countries in San Francisco, California, took effect on October 24th, 1945. The second learning objective is to describe the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, and the World Trade Organization, WTO. Of course, the precursor institution to the WTO is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. The IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, is regarded as the global lender of last resort to national governments and a leading supporter of exchange rate stability. Its stated mission is working to foster global monetary cooperation, secure financial stability, facilitate international trade, promote high employment and sustainable economic growth, and lastly, reduce poverty around the world. The IMF began with an original goal of reconstructing the international monetary system after World War II. It now plays a central role in the management of both balance of payment difficulties, which we shall explain later, and international financial crisis. Through a quota system, countries contribute funds to a pool from which countries can borrow if they experience balance of payment problems. The World Bank is an international financial institution that provides loans and grants to the government and private institutions of low and medium income countries for the purpose of pursuing capital projects. Its vision is to create a world free of poverty on a livable planet. The World Bank Group is a unique global partnership of 5 institutions. People think that the World Bank Group is just one institution. It's really 5 different banks that make up the World Bank Group. So the World Bank Group which is why it's called a group, but we just colloquially call it the World Bank, and people think it's just one bank. The World Bank Group is a unique global partnership of 5 institutions working for sustainable solutions that reduce poverty and build shared prosperity in developing countries. In 1995, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was superseded by the World Trade Organization, or WTO. GATT, which is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, though likely successful in its goal, lacked a coherent institutional structure. In short, GATT was a legal agreement acting as an international organization. The World Trade Organization, or WTO, incorporates the principles of GATT and is better positioned to carry them out because, among other factors, it is better versed on issues such as intellectual property, has a faster dispute settlement system, and wields more power. Significantly, WTO rules are applicable to services, an aspect of intellectual property, along with goods. However, ongoing tariff disputes have arguably exposed limitations in WTO's capacity for dispute settlement. The United Nations, or the UN, which is in your great city, New York City, which succeeded the League of Nations, was established after World War II, and its charter was drafted by 50 countries in San Francisco, California. Took effect on October 24th, 1945. With the aim of preventing future world wars, the UN is an intergovernmental organization whose stated purpose are to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations, achieve international cooperation, and serve as a center for harmonizing the actions of nations. The UN is the world's largest international organization. So, as part of your learning objectives for the week, you should also be able to respond to the following questions. Because just knowing what the IMF is, as an example, is okay. But it's even better that you understand how IMF operates and how it achieves its institutional goals. So the first thing you want to be able to respond to is, how does the IMF achieve its goals? The IMF achieves its goals of fostering international financial stability by offering 3 distinct but complementary services. The first is policy advice. To maintain stability and prevent crisis in the international monetary system, the IMF keeps a regular policy dialogue with governments of its member countries. It assesses economic conditions and recommends policies that enable sustainable growth. The IMF also monitors regional and global economic and financial developments. The second way IMF fulfills its mandate is through financial assistance. The IMF provides loans and concessional financing, financial assistance to member countries experiencing actual or potential balance of payment problems. This is a core responsibility of the IMF. So to be sure that I'm not speaking to myself, it's important that I take time to ensure that everybody understands what balance of payment problems, what that means. So every country consumes things that it needs to import. And to be able to finance those imports, that country needs to have things that it sells to the rest of the world so that it can have money to buy the things that it needs. So if you've ever, I don't know, bought something from Temu, it probably came from China. So that's buying something from overseas. Um, so balance of payment is the total sum of money that comes into a country versus the total sum of money the country needs to finance its imports. If a country only sells $1 million worth of stuff to the world, but it needs to import $2 million worth of stuff from the world, it effectively has what is called a balance of payment deterioration because it needs an extra $1 million to buy all the other stuff that it needs because it's only making $1 million. If you were to reduce it to a personal income situation, it will be the equivalent of making your paycheck is $1,000, net take home pay is $1,000, but your overhead is $2,000. So that means you're going to need an extra $1,000 to make it work. So that's what a balance of payment is. When that happens, the IMF steps in. Temporarily, it might loan the country the extra 1,000 that it needs on the condition that the country cuts down its budget. It is not unlikely, it is not unlike or dissimilar to an individual whose take-home pay is 1,000, but their overhead is 1,500. Even if someone were to loan you 500 bucks, you're going to have to make some changes. Either you're going to eat out less, you're going to cut out your cable bills, but you got to bring your bill to at least 1,000 or ideally less than 1,000, which is your take home pay. And this is what IMF does on a macro level, roughly what it does on a macro level countries. So that's what balance of payment deterioration speaks to. Um, so the third function of the IMF is capacity development. IMF provides capacity development, which is technical assistance and training of government officials to help member countries strengthen economic institutions and statistics, as well as capacities in areas such as taxation and administration, expenditure management, monetary and exchange rate policies, financial system supervision and regulation, and legislative frameworks. So if IMF does all this beautiful work, meaningful work, needed services, why is the IMF controversial? Because it seems like whenever anything goes wrong in every developing or middle income country, everybody blames the IMF. So consider it this way. Since the collapse of fixed exchange rates in 1973, the International Monetary Fund has taken a more active role in in fostering financial stability, especially in developing countries. Some critics say the conditions the IMF attaches to its loans are too harsh and have harmed developing countries. With respect to conditionalities of credit facilities, so these conditions are called conditionalities. With respect to conditionalities of credit facilities, IMF loans are conditional on the implementation of certain economic policies. These policies tend to involve the following. Again, given this example of the individual that I cited that has a net income of 1,000 but overhead of 1,500, you got to cut the cable, you got to start cooking more and eating out less, and any other thing you can do to bring your expenditure to be at least no higher than your income. But with respect to nation states, some of the conditionalities the IMF would require is reducing government borrowing and higher taxes and lower spending. So this will be the equivalent for the individual. Again, I try to make the class not be very too abstract and actually try to make it relatable to individual challenges. So this would be the equivalent, roughly, of somebody who can finance their lifestyle, but they go on charging stuff on their credit card. You can see how that could quickly become a problem. So the first thing you want to do is stop borrowing. The second thing you want to do is uh, if you say increase taxes for the individual, that means get a second job because you got to increase your revenue. So the way this translates for conditionalities that IMF gives to nation states is that reducing government borrowing, and this would necessitate higher taxes and lower spending. The second way is higher interest rates to stabilize the currency. Um, the third is allow failing firms to go bankrupt. And fourth, structural adjustment, privatization, deregulation, reducing corruption and bureaucracy. The challenge is that these structural adjustment policies and macroeconomic intervention can make already difficult economic situations worse, at least in the immediate term. And therefore, this leads to the often heard complaints that the IMF facilities worsen poverty. Another significant controversy is that the IMF does not sufficiently understand the dynamics of the countries they work with, insisting instead on blanket reforms. Others, such as Joseph Stiglitz, a New Keynesian economist, argue that while the IMF does not participate in a conspiracy to further undermine indebted countries, it, however, reflects the interest and ideology of Western financial community, close quote. Yet another criticism of the IMF are neoliberal policies such as privatization. Critics argue that free market policies are not always suitable for fragile countries with weak institutions. As an example is privatization, which can lead to the creation of private monopolies who end up exploiting consumers. In addition to being criticized for implementing free market reforms, others criticize the IMF for being too interventionist. Believers in free market argue that it is better to let capital markets operate without attempts at intervention. They further argue that attempts to influence exchange rates only make things worse, suggesting that it is better to allow currencies to reach their market level. Others further suggest that bailing out countries with, with large debt creates moral hazard because the possibility of getting bailed out encourages countries to borrow more. So, the IMF has also been criticized for imposing policies with little or no consultation with the affected countries. That said, it is also fair to note that the shortcomings of the IMF tend to be widely publicized, but its successes less so. Furthermore, criticism tends to focus on short-term problems and ignores the long-term view. Significantly, IMF loans have helped many countries avoid liquidity crises. Crucially, the fact that there is a lender of last resort provides an important confidence boost for investors. This is important, especially during financial turmoil. IMF can be an easy target, to be fair. Sometimes countries who need to undertake painful short-term macroeconomic adjustments lack the political will to do so. In this way, an IMF intervention enables the government to secure a loan and then pass the economic hardship blame on the IMF. Realize that countries are not obligated to accept an IMF facility. It is indeed countries who approach the IMF for a loan. The fact that so many countries accept IMF facilities suggests there must be at least some benefit. I did mention in the early weeks of the semester that there are some words and phrases that I would want you guys to write down, pay attention to, and work it into your vocabulary as to the extent possible and appropriate. And they have positive signaling effects. One of those phrases is moral hazard, which I used earlier on. And it is the concept that individuals or institutions are disincentivized to alter their behavior when cost of their risk or bad decision making is borne by others. So think about this for a second. If you are, say, for instance, I don't know if folks still do that, but let's say you're a sneaker collector. You collect some of the most expensive, the most desirable Jordan sneakers. Chances are you have them locked up somewhere safe to protect your investment, right? And that's a good thing. But let's say you begin to get too worried that there has been a lot of break-ins in the neighborhood, that maybe you should buy insurance. So you buy insurance, and insurance says, we will cover your loss 100% if you get burglarized. You can see how that person might begin to suffer moral hazard because they may not be as particular about securing their sneakers. Because at this point, if you steal it, insurance will settle them. They're good. This could actually lead to higher risk taking of not making sure you secure your sneaker as appropriate, or at least as you did prior to purchasing insurance. So that's the risk of moral hazard. But on the other hand, if you say to people, if you don't secure your sneakers and they steal it, you're going to run a loss. You're going to see them buy new padlocks and get a safe. So that is the theory of moral hazard broken down into simple logic. So in closing, permit me to conclude by foreshadowing next week's lecture, which will be on the liberal perspective in international political economy. And for me, as a firm believer in international order and international rules-based system, which, by the way, is immensely under attack, and you could see why the global order arrived at a liberal order post-World War II. And I do look forward to your assessments for this week. And most especially, I look forward to covering the international liberal system next week. Thank you. And I'm going to stop the recording.